Today, we're diving into something that could reshape the entire American economy. We're talking about a potential takeover at the most powerful financial institution in the world, prediction markets going wild overnight, and a nomination that has investors both terrified and excited. We'll also explore what happens when political loyalty collides with central banking, why Treasury yields just dropped below a critical threshold, and what all of this means for your mortgage, your savings, and the global perception of American financial independence. And trust me, I've saved the most interesting part for the very end of this episode. I spent years inside one of the biggest, most respected media organizations you can name. I watched editors bend stories to fit narratives, saw facts get buried when they didn't serve the right agenda, and eventually I realized I couldn't be part of that system anymore. So I walked away. Now I'm here in Europe, independent, free to speak the truth, and committed to bringing you the real story behind the headlines, no matter where it leads. Before we go further, I need to ask you something. If you find value in what we do here, if you appreciate the hours we spend fact-checking, digging through sources, and making sure you're not fed misinformation, please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you're able, consider sponsoring our work. We're not backed by corporate money. We don't have advertisers pulling strings. It's just us doing the hard work of independent journalism. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you'll see exactly why it matters. So stay with me, because what's coming is going to surprise you. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, scroll through the news, and the headline says the United States Federal Reserve, the institution that controls interest rates, influences inflation, and essentially steers the entire American economy, is about to be handed over to one of Donald Trump's closest allies. Not some distant, apolitical technocrat, not a veteran central banker with decades of experience navigating financial crises. No, we're talking about someone who has been at Trump's side for years, someone who shaped his economic worldview, someone who defended his policies on cable news over and over again. That person is Kevin Hassett. And right now, according to markets, according to insiders, and even according to some very casual remarks from the president himself, Hassett is the overwhelming favorite to become the next chair of the Federal Reserve. Now, if you follow me on Telegram, you already heard this earlier today. I posted the details as soon as they broke. But let me walk you through exactly how this story unfolded, because it's not just about one nomination. It's about what happens when the line between politics and monetary policy gets erased entirely. It started with a report published by Bloomberg. The article suggested that Hassett had emerged as the front runner for the Fed chair position. And what happened next? Well, it was anything but subtle. Prediction markets literally exploded. On Kalshi, the odds for a Hassett nomination jumped to 80%, effectively doubling overnight. Treasury yields, those critical indicators of borrowing costs, dropped below 4% for the first time in a month. And why? Because investors began pricing in one thing above all else: lower interest rates and potentially multiple cuts in a row. You see, driving President Trump's interest rate agenda would be at the very top of Hassett's to-do list. We know that. Trump has made it abundantly clear for years, and this reaction wasn't driven by mere speculation or rumors. Hassett himself has openly said on the record that if he were running the Fed today, he would already be cutting rates. Trump, meanwhile, has spent years complaining loudly and publicly about Jerome Powell, the very man he appointed to lead the Fed in the first place. Trump's complaint? Powell failed to slash borrowing costs fast enough. But here's the thing. Installing Hassett would solve that problem instantly. For Trump, this would be the ultimate power move, placing a loyalist in a seat that has traditionally been insulated from politics, a seat that shapes the price of every mortgage, every car loan, every business investment across the United States. And the timeline here only adds to the drama. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is overseeing the search for the next Federal Reserve chair, has insisted that a decision will come before Christmas. They want to move quickly. But Trump, in his usual style, has already hinted that he knows exactly who he's picking. He said it very casually, almost in passing, to reporters aboard Air Force One. Quote, "I know who I'm going to pick." Now, for a process that's supposed to be wide open, transparent, deliberative, that comment sounded like the quiet part being said out loud. Wouldn't you agree? It's as if the decision has already been made, and everything else is just theater. So let's talk about Kevin Hassett himself for a moment, because understanding who he is helps us understand what's really at stake here. In public, Hassett plays it modest. He says he's not convinced that Bloomberg's story is accurate. He insists there are so many good candidates in the running. But then, in the very next breath, he acknowledges that he would be honored to serve. Well, of course he would. Who in their right mind would turn down the opportunity to lead the most powerful central bank in the world? Hassett also boasts, with barely disguised satisfaction, that markets responded very, very positively to the idea of him taking the job. He even spelled out what Trump's supporters want to hear, that a Trump-aligned Fed would mean cheaper car loans, easier mortgages, broadly lower borrowing costs for everyday Americans. But here's what he didn't mention. Here's what he chose not to say, and I think that choice is very deliberate. A Trump-aligned Fed would also likely mean more inflation. It would mean your savings losing purchasing power. It would mean the central bank prioritizing short-term political goals over long-term economic stability. And that brings us to a very serious problem, one that many economists are already warning about. Even if the Fed cuts short-term rates, long-term rates may not fall if investors believe the Federal Reserve has lost its independence. That's the real issue here. The loss of independence, whether actual or just perceived, will be a massive red flag to global markets and to global investors. Think about it this way. If markets believe that the Federal Reserve is doing Trump's bidding, responding to his tweets and his demands instead of inflation data or employment numbers, borrowing costs could actually rise. That risk, that perception of political interference, would hang over a Hassett-led Fed from day one. There's no way around it. And here's where things get even more intriguing. Inside the White House, the dynamics are far more complicated than they appear on the surface. Trump, who is famously unpredictable, it's impossible to argue with that, has been known to change personnel decisions at the very last possible moment. Former Fed Governor Kevin Walsh, for example, remains a distant but non-zero possibility. Christopher Waller, Michelle Bowman, even BlackRock's Rick Rieder are still technically in the running. But here's the difference. None of them, according to advisors, have the personal closeness to Trump that Hassett has built over years of counsel, loyalty, and on-camera defense of Trump's policies. Trump has also grown increasingly frustrated with Powell. He's called him grossly incompetent, among many other things I won't repeat here. He's openly joked about firing senior officials who don't deliver lower rates. The president wants someone he can trust, someone who, in his own words, understands his direction. Translation: someone who will do as he's told, not necessarily act based on economic data. Former Press Secretary Sean Spicer put it very, very bluntly. He said Trump is unlikely to give another major post to someone he doesn't know personally. That tells you everything you need to know about how this decision is being made. Meanwhile, Powell's own future remains quite uncertain. His term as chair ends in May of 2026, but legally he could stay on as a governor for 2 additional years. Now, if he steps down early, Trump would gain yet another seat to fill, giving him unprecedented influence over a central bank he has criticized relentlessly. The entire saga is unfolding, just as the Fed itself is deeply divided, fractured internally about whether to cut rates again in December. I actually have an entire video on that topic here on my channel. I go into the details of what to expect and whether the Fed will cut rates. I'll link that video for you in the description. So at this point, we don't know if the Fed will cut rates this month. But what could have been the biggest monetary policy decision of the year may soon be completely overshadowed by Trump's choice for the top job. And that brings the story back to the central mystery. Trump says nobody knows his decision until he makes it. His press secretary echoes that line, telling reporters to stay tuned. Even Hassett insists that nothing is official, but investors have already priced in the possibility of a Trump-aligned Fed. A Fed eager to cut rates, unconcerned about the optics of taking direction directly from the White House, and ready to reshape monetary policy in a way Americans haven't seen in decades. If Trump announces Hassett in the coming days, and I think there's a very strong chance he will, you can bet the reaction will be immediate. Borrowing costs could fall, or they could rise, depending entirely on market confidence in the Fed's independence. Political battles will erupt over that very issue, Fed independence. And here's what really worries me. The Fed, this institution that's supposed to sit above politics, will find itself thrust directly into the center of the 2026 economic and political storm. It will no longer be perceived as independent globally. That perception, once lost, is incredibly difficult to regain. The Senate confirmation process will become a proxy fight over Trump's influence. Every question will be about loyalty versus data, politics versus economics, and the consequences of that fight will reverberate far beyond Washington. They'll affect every American household, every business, every investor who depends on a stable, predictable, independent central bank. So let me bring this all together for you. We're looking at a potential nomination that would place a Trump loyalist at the head of the Federal Reserve. Markets have already reacted, pricing in lower rates and easier monetary policy. But the risk, the real danger, is that this move could undermine the Fed's independence, raise long-term borrowing costs, fuel inflation, and ultimately destabilize the very system it's supposed to protect. Trump wants control. Hassett would give him that, but the cost could be enormous, not just economically, but in terms of global confidence in American institutions, and that's something we can't afford to lose. For now, all we can do is wait. The announcement could come any day. But one thing is certain. This decision will shape the American economy and possibly the global economy for years to come. If you found this analysis valuable, if it helped you understand what's really happening behind the scenes, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who needs to hear this. And if you're able, consider supporting our work. We're doing this without corporate backing, without advertisers, just independent journalism that holds power accountable. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I need to take a moment to talk to you directly because what we do here matters, and I want you to understand why. Every single day, I spend hours going through sources, cross-referencing claims, verifying facts, making absolutely sure that what I bring to you is accurate and trustworthy. In a world drowning in misinformation, in clickbait, in stories designed to manipulate rather than inform, that work is exhausting. It's time-consuming, but it's also essential. I left the corporate media world because I refused to be part of the machine that twists the truth to fit an agenda. Now, I'm here, independent, answerable only to you and committed to giving you the real story, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. But I can't do this alone. If you find value in this work, if you appreciate having a source you can trust, I'm asking you to help keep this channel alive. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're able, please consider becoming a sponsor. Your support, even a small contribution, makes all the difference. It allows me to keep digging, keep fact-checking, keep bringing you the truth without compromise. Thank you for being here, and thank you for standing with independent journalism.